Hi, this is Tiara, your host of Booktrovert Reader. I am very excited to introduce a new indie author on my podcast today, and her book is called The Tales of Alexandria Stecklar, The Locket, and her name is Tiara Brown. I was very excited about her book. I cannot wait to share this with y'all today. So Tiara, definitely tell us about you and your book.
Hi. Well, first off, thanks for having me on. And yeah, so this is my debut novel. And yeah, The Tales of Alexandria Stecklar is about a 15-year-old girl named Alex with telekinetic powers. And she lives underground with her family during an on-again, off-again war between psychics like herself and magical sorcerers. And one day she gets separated from her family above ground because her and her family live underground during this conflict. So she gets separated from them above ground in the land of the sorcerers, and she has to make it back home before she gets captured or something worse happens. So I'm super excited to talk about it.
That's what I kind of was like so interested about your
Yeah.
book when I was reading it. I was like, it has dystopian vibes, it has magical vibes, it has psychic power, sci-fi vibes in it. And I was like, wow, this is kind of fun and interesting to see like psychics and sorcerers to be at war with each other. I thought that was the most interesting part of the book for me. With this, how did you become an author, and how did you decide fantasy genre as the genre you wanted to write for this book?
So I've always loved storytelling ever since I was a kid. I think my teachers in school knew that I was going to become an author before I did, just because like one of my favorite things in actually primary school is to practice our grammar and sentence structure. We had to like write stories, and my teacher didn't care what we wrote about. It was just to practice grammar and putting periods in. And my stories were wild. They were just so ridiculous. But I've just always really liked storytelling, and I think I picked to write in the fantasy genre because true story, even though I liked writing stories when I was really little, I really hated reading because I thought it was really boring. And then, yeah. And then the first book I ever read that got me into reading was a fantasy book. So it was called Jeremy Thatcher, the Dragon Hatcher. And it was set in modern day, but it was about this kid who he thought he found the colorful rock. And then it was a dragon.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
and then ever since then, I was like, oh, reading is awesome. I just have to like what I'm reading about, which was a huge epiphany for like an elementary school kid. And then ever since then, I just love fantasy. I have expanded my reading catalog since then. So I do like just reading anything with a good story, but I think I will always just have that love of fantasy because that's what got me into reading in the first place.
Would you entertain other genres since you do read other genres as well?
Oh, yeah. Anything with a good story. Because I did read a lot of dystopian future books back in the day. Were like the hottest things because I read all the Hunger Games books before the movie came out. I read Brave New World, The Giver. I started 1984 when I was a teenager, but I never finished it because that book is really depressing. And
it really is. And I'm just sorry, but think about it. It's how close is it right now?
Yeah, I was like, so I never finished that one, but no, I read that. There was this other book I read, I think I was around 13, called Journey to America about a Polish book during World War II. And that was a really, really good book too. So I did expand after elementary school. But anything with a good story, because I love just storytelling in general. So I love movies, television shows, all the things. Provided that it has just an interesting story that I can get into. I also read Oliver Twist by Charles. I really like that one too. And I also like A Tale of Two Cities. I read A Tale of Two Cities when I was in high school. I will admit I needed Spark Notes to get through it just because the way it reads is kind of different.
Oh my gosh. It's
a great story.
The Locket. I'm going to call it The Locket. How did you come up with this story? What it was inspired by?
So it was definitely inspired by a mixture of things. I would say the premise was inspired by three main things. One, my love of fantasy.
Mhm.
Second, I am a sucker for the trope of a fish out of water, which expands genres, but I always find that a lot of fun. And then third, I am also a bit of a history nerd too,
Mhm.
and fantasy does this a lot, where it pays ode to like that medieval aesthetic. I kind of wanted to do that too with like the sorcerers in some kind of way. So the premise of like a 15-year-old girl like experiencing a new world where she experiences that aesthetic, at least with like the clothes and the architecture of the
Mhm.
sorcerers, is like that's how I developed the premise. Like somehow that like mushed in my mind, and I was like, oh, this would be a good idea. And then the actual story itself, how it divulged over time, I would say just probably it's just I think through life. I know it's a fantasy story, but just observing how people interact with each other, different family
Mhm.
dynamics, and trying to figure out like what is a fun story to tell. I would say it's just a huge mixture of just all of those things. But it was a lot of fun to write. And it's the first book in a trilogy. It's only part one.
All right, pausing real quick, and I'm promising we'll get back to it. I love every one of your readers, and I'm in need of your support to help this podcast flourish. Here are the few ways you can help. 1. Subscribe. Subscribing to your favorite platform ensures that you get the latest episodes right away. 2. Rate and review. Leave me a glowing review and rating on your favorite podcast platform of your choice. Your feedback not only is exciting to me, but also helps other fantasy enthusiasts discover this podcast. 3. Share. Spread the word of Booktrovert Reader Podcast. Share these episodes on social media and recommend this book podcast to your friends. Sharing this podcast creates an amazing community of listeners just like you. Make sure to check out the description below to find all my links to my social media. 4. Support through subscriptions. Your support helps me continue making content. In the description below, you will find how to support me on this podcast. By subscribing, rating, reviewing, and sharing, it will help Booktrovert Reader Podcast get in front of other readers like you. Thank you for being a part of this journey, and make sure to tell me your favorite fantasy book. All right, readers, back to the episode. I see the dynamic of the family. They seem close knit, but obviously the parents are harvesting a lot of secrets they're not willing to share with Alex. I love your storytelling in it.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. I love the storytelling. It's very fluid, and the relationship between them is very, I don't know how to say it, homely. I don't know if that's the best way to describe it, but it's interesting dynamic for them being holed up the way they are. So you got inspired just because you just wanted to write something like that. How did that come evolve? Like, how long did it take you to write it, and how did it evolve on you getting it published?
Oh, okay. So that's a bit of a story. So I actually,
I love stories. Come
yeah.
on.
So I originally thought of the idea for like the whole. So originally the whole trilogy was gonna be one book, and I
Mhm.
originally thought of it when I was, I think, around 13, 14 years old, and I even actually tried to write it back then. It was written very badly. I was going through a Shakespeare phase and had no idea what I was doing, but it's okay. Like practice makes perfect, and the story idea was there. So then I went to college, and then after college, one of my friends actually was like, "Hey, remember that like book thing that you tried to write when we were like kids? Like whatever like happened to that?" And then so I reread it because I kept it, and I was like, "Oh man, I guess I have to rewrite this as an adult." So I started doing that, and then it took about 6 years only because I was still under the impression that the trilogy was going to be one book. And
Okay.
I'm the type of writer that I will outline everything, but I don't write necessarily the scenes in chronological order. I'm kind of like all over the place, but because of that, I do outline everything. That way it makes doing that easier. Because I was doing that, I wrote parts of book 2, I wrote parts of book 3, and then I realized as the story started unfolding that, oh, this is actually 3 stories because it's 3 separate climaxes, and I'm trying to make it one. And I was like, okay, no, let me break this up. And then when I did that, I was actually able to finish book one, because if I kept it as one book, it would have also been very massive.
It would have been like a Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson moment, right?
Yeah, it would have been like, oh, this is a lot. Like this is because of that. At least like I'm working on book 2 right now, but when I finished book 1 officially, a lot of book 2 was already written, so it was a bit of a head start. So it did pay off that way, but it was about like 6 years, mainly because of that. But at least I kind of got like a head start on the second book, and the whole thing, the whole trilogy is outlined, so I know how it's going to end in all the things. But that was the reason it took that long.
Oh boy. I could see the concept of what you were doing, so yeah, I get
it. Yeah. It just became super massive because like when I originally thought of the idea when I was a kid, I would just magically make things happen without any character development. So rewriting the book, I was like, no, like this has to be like led up to and foreshadowed. So we kept stretching it out more and more, and then I realized it was 3.
You've grown since you were a wee one.
Yeah. I was magically make things. I was like, oh, that makes sense. Like, no, it really doesn't. But the idea was there. Like the premise was there.
So do you have a date when you're launching book 2?
So not yet. I'm still trying to finish it. I'm hoping I can finish it enough where, I guess, finish my drafts enough where I bring in editors by like the end of this year. So I'm hoping December 31st, and that might end up being January 15th. I'm hoping to do that, and then I will have a date when that happens. But I do want to at least like get to that step first.
I mean, that's a good idea. Have it written, step 1.
Yeah. I was just like, because then at that point it's not so bad, because then you bring in editors and it's a back and forth. Like most of it's already written, because you could end up changing a lot, but it feels like the heavy lifting. I can't say words. The heavy lifting at least is not as bad. Like that part is over.
Sometimes I ask this question: do you have a day job? And if you do, what do you do?
Yes. So another thing I like to do. So I am really into dancing. So I recently got a job at a dance studio for kids.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I work in the admin office. So I'm not a dance teacher, although it would be cool to be a dance teacher one day too. So I do that part-time, and then the other part-time is like the whole writing thing, which is great because I have guaranteed income, and then it still gives me time to work on this.
You got it. You work at a dance studio, and you work part-time with writing your book full-time. That's amazing. Okay. So asking more about your book, I like the magic system that you were doing concerning the psychics and the sorcerers and the history behind them fighting with each other. You said you wanted to do it, but what inspired you to kind of write that conflict between the two and the powers on each side?
When I originally thought of the idea when I was a kid, I loved, because I have a history nerd in my history classes, and I think making it a war, I think that was inspired mainly because at the time, I think I was just learning a lot about wars, and I find it fascinating. I don't like war. I think war is not good. I do want to preface that. But even to this day, I do find it very interesting why certain countries like get into conflict with each other. I wanted some type of friction between the two people or the two countries. So for me, I was like, oh yeah, I will. I'll make it a war. But I didn't realize that when I was 14 is like sometimes wars can be really complicated, which is fine. It's like, oh yes, okay, if I make it a war, like why are they at war? But since that's like a subject that I'm already into as a person, I think it was easy for me to go that route. But yeah, so I think that's why I chose to make them at conflict. And I also think it's pretty relatable in the sense that, again, war is not good. In the history of mankind, being at war is, I guess, in a weird way, it's a little relatable because that it's only in recent years, I feel like, that we realize, like, hey, like, having peace with each other is the better option. I'm not saying war is good because I'm not, but it's the same thing.
No.
I love reading about it, and I think because I used to get so mad at the way like history teachers teach history because I'd be like, no, guys, history is so fascinating because I feel like when you learn about why certain wars happen and you look at the players that start things, the political parties, like you really have to take or put the humanity back in people because that explains a lot of why certain things happen, especially in war, where it's just this person reacted this way because of X, which happened because of something over there, and like their mentality and or how they were raised. So that's part of the reason why I find why certain wars start. But I also think it's great to learn how wars start because then you can learn how to prevent them.
Talk to me about your writing style. You have an interesting way of doing it that I've never heard of, and I can't place you as the pantser, the discovery, or the plotter. You're like almost all three. So just go more into detail about your writing process in that. And what would you say you would fit into the most, your best guess?
So I'm so bad at, is pantser the one where you like skip around and stuff like that? Like
you don't plan anything, you just write it.
Write it. I guess I'm a little bit of a mold of all three. I have been a pantser in the past, and it kind of takes forever to write anything because like sometimes you don't end up using it because there's no plan. You'll have scenes like, oh, well, this, I don't really need this, or I established this earlier here. Although I feel like my first instinct is to be a pantser. So I guess I'm a little bit of all three because with the outline, it allows you to at least know where you're going. But I can't write in chronological order. I have to like skip around.
Would you say it's kind of like a mood kind of writing? Like you're just like, oh, I'm really inspired about this scene and this particular part of the outline?
Yeah. Yeah, I would definitely say that. But because of that, I like skip around a lot. But the outline is great because then it's good to know like where you're going, even at like a rough idea of like point A to point B. That gives me direction, but I feel like my first instinct is to be like a mood writer and have like some pantser elements into it. So I guess I'm a little bit of a mix. I don't know if that answers the question fully or makes it easier to fit me somewhere.
No, that's why I was like, I had to bring it up because I was like, you do kind of all three. So I was like, you don't really fit a category. So it's unique to me. So that's why I had to ask. So not a bad thing.
Yeah.
It works for you. And if it works, you keep going.
I do. For me, I like the mood writer, actually. I never thought about that. I like that category for myself because for me, I will say if I'm in a certain mood or certain feeling, I think it is easier for me to write that scene and put it in a way that like emotionally put it in a way that I want to and just like to connect with like the setting or the character or characters in that way. So I do that a lot, but I guess I never phrased it like as a mood writer. So I think I'm gonna, I might do that.
So do you plot your characters? Because I know you were, when you're rewriting this, you're like, oh, you had to develop the characters and everything. Did you had to like put in an Excel sheet or did you find another way to keep them separated?
An Excel sheet probably would have been the best. I have like multiple Word docs of just information and then sometimes notebooks of like information of people. Most of the time I just write the story, but I do have characterization in mind. And then when I go back in the editing process, a lot of times before I bring on another editor, I go back and I reread the story for multiple different reasons. For looking to edit one specific reason and thing. And one of the things is characterization and just making sure, like when I'm doing that, does this character make sense? Do you make sense to act this way considering what happened before and your personality and your backstory? Because you had brought up like the parents and the family dynamic, and I do admit, because I wrote it, they can be Sometimes I think they're a little extreme, but it's for their backstory, which will get revealed in later books. Like their actions make sense. Like they have their own personal
Right.
traumas and things that, especially the mom, that she is not working through.
Yeah.
That comes out in her parenting, and she doesn't mean anything by it. She's, at the end of the day, her and her husband love their kids, and they're just trying to keep them safe, and they're doing the best they can. And I was definitely inspired by life with that, because like I think one of the moments I think I became an adult is when I realized a lot of parents, they make mistakes, but they really are doing the best that they can with what they know how, and with, and not just parents, but like anyone in multiple relationships.
Because I was going to ask you as well, like if there's anything that happened in the book or the characters that kind of really inspired you to write, like, or a person specifically might be inspiring you to write the character or anything like that.
So the parents was just an observation of just different parents, I think I grew up with, like, you know, like my friends' parents, my parents, just like observation of like certain overprotectiveness, or maybe they haven't dealt with something. It's like they're doing like the best that they can. I would say that the main character, so when I was a kid, all of my friends accused me of just making myself the main character. So so this main character is inspired by like just writing someone who's the opposite personality.
Oh, okay.
So just because I was just like, all right, guys, fine. I will write someone who is nothing like me. And I overthink everything, and the main character is just like, well, I'm just going to do it. And it's like, oh, oops, maybe that was a bad idea. She was inspired by just me trying to find someone like the opposite personality of me. I don't know if have you met the main character's love interest yet?
No, I'm waiting to get to that part, and I was so excited. Right now, she got to the locket. The locket's speaking to her, and her mother's hiding things, and I'm like, ah. And this whole time, I'm thinking, how is she going to interact with other people if the only people she ever interacted with was her family members? Is she going to be socially awkward?
Yeah. I mean, that's where she does stuff where it's like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that. Like based on other people's reactions, like, oh, like, I don't know, like one of my friends, she has read it, and she told me that she was like, Tiara, your main character is the way she interacts with people. She's like, I was slightly annoyed, but at the same time, I remembered, oh yeah, she can't interact with people, so she's doing good for what she can. So she does, yeah. So when she starts interacting with people, she's trying, and she doesn't take the route of not saying anything. She just takes the route of like, why did you say that? Or maybe you shouldn't have said that. Or, maybe you shouldn't have reacted that way. Like, but she immediately regrets it. And it's like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that. But it's really like she doesn't know any better. Like those social skills weren't developed, but she gets better. So it's okay.
Okay. Yeah, because I liked how she interacted with her family. She just had no problems speaking her mind. So I can foresee that being like a kind of not an issue, but just kind of something she'll have to work through when she actually interacts with people that's not her family.
Yeah.
So I'm very excited to get to that part to see how she does.
Yeah. So I guess I will say, I mean, I don't think it's too much of a spoiler, but especially with the description of the book, when you get to the part where she does get separated from her family, a lot of action and stuff happens, and that's when she meets like the love interest, and she meets like other people and stuff like that, and it turns like way more action packed. Like right now, like she's like at home.
Kind of curious to see if this world is going to be exactly how their parents pictured it for her. So I'm excited to read it. I was trying to read as fast as I could, but I'm only limited to so much.
That's okay.
What would you say is the hardest thing about writing fantasy, and how did you overcome it?
I would say like the hardest part about fantasy is probably the world building. When you write something set in our world, you kind of already have like
The framework.
Yeah, like we all have like the layout laid out in our heads, and you don't have to explain as much. And in fantasy with magic systems, like you have to find that balance between like, okay, this is how it works without overdoing it. And that's something that I did struggle with, that like my editor was just like, hey, we didn't need to, this is extra information we don't need.
Oh.
Like you can explain it this way. Like now you're info dumping. And I think in fantasy, just because if you're creating a whole new world or you're creating a whole new magic system and you're like, no, but I have to explain it so people understand, it's literally finding that balance of like not info dumping, or if you are, I mean, a little bit of info dumping has to happen, but if you are doing it in a clever way, like someone told me this writing tip and then I put it in my book where they brought up Harry Potter. Mm-hmm. And J.K. Rowling sometimes info dumps with magic while they're at Hogwarts, but it works for the context of the book because they're at school and then you expect it. And then I was just like, oh, well, you know, if they live at home, they could be homeschooled. And I was like, I can have your dad be a teacher and he's info dumping the backstory, but it's a history lesson and you expect that. Right. It's okay. So just finding, I think, little cheat sheets where you can still do that, but it makes sense and it's not forced. So I would say that's probably the hardest part. Also, just thinking of a system that makes sense too. Mm-hmm. I would say that is the hardest part, and how I overcame it is, I guess, a lot of advice from the internet and editors and trial and error.
Yeah, I did realize that when I first started this. It was talking about her being in underground and all this stuff, and I'm like, why? I have to keep going to figure out why. And I was like, all right, let me give her a chance. She'll hopefully she'll tell me. And you did tell it in the homeschool setting. And he was kind of giving ideas about the war and the history of the royalty of the psychics. So I want to know more about the sorcerer side. So I'm like, okay, I got to read more probably to find more about them. Great job. I don't want to be like, oh, good job, but I think I'm very intrigued by your writing style, and I can see that the way you're describing it. I'm like, yeah, I can see that. Oh yeah, I can see that. I really am like, this is good.
Oh no, wait, I'm happy that you like it. I'm happy you like the writing style too. I did try to tell it, I mean, especially with like the way the prologue is, because the whole story is essentially in flashback. Like I did try to also tell it kind of like if I'm telling someone a story, like if I were to just like, oh hey, person like, or a friend or me, like, oh hey, so this is a thing that happened to me a long time ago. I'm happy that it's flowing well. Like that's good because I always I love feedback because I do want each book to be better and better, because it just means that you're growing as a writer and you're getting better and better.
Do you have any other plans to write another fantasy series out of this, or you're just focusing on this current trilogy right now?
I'm currently focusing on this trilogy, and if I do this, it'd be afterwards. I have been thinking about two things. One, writing a prequel after this trilogy is over. I can't say what the prequel's about because it would like spoil the entire trilogy. But like a setup for certain things, like how things happen, especially with like the main character and like the living underground situation thing. So it would be like a prequel of that. I was thinking about writing maybe middle grade young adult of these kids at a boarding school to learn how to be spies. And they a lot of books in this series, not necessarily a trilogy, it could be a lot more. Like when you have TV shows and they were like books on like the episode and stuff like that. They used to, like, because they did that with Lizzie McGuire a long time ago. But I'm not sure if that ever caught on.
Can they be read as standalones or?
Yeah, so standalones in the same like universe, put it like that way. That way it's not necessarily a trilogy where you have to read it in a specific order. You could read one and it's fine. Or you could read two and it's fine. Like, so I've been bouncing around that idea. I don't know if I'm going to do it, but I do think it would be fun to like write about kids learning to be spies at a spy boarding school. I just think that would be fun. And that would be that wouldn't be fantasy. That would just be adventure. and set in our world. So
maybe a fantasy artifact. I don't know, but
I mean, I could. That would, yeah, Indiana Jones it.
Yeah, I'll read that.
But something along those lines. I think that would be fun. I do want to finish the trilogy first before I commit to like the other thing.
Being a mood writer, you could just totally abandon your trilogy for that new project. So yeah, you better be careful.
Yeah, so I was like, I don't want to do that. So I was just like, that's like mentally on the back burner of like, okay, what do I do next? Like, but after I finish this, because yeah, writing book 2 has been a lot. I really like book 2. I can't say a lot of things that happened because it would spoil book 1, but a lot in true trilogy fashion, a lot of things always happen in the second book. So a lot of things.
Is this ending up to be a bigger book than the first one?
Yes, I think, yeah, the first one is a little over 50,000 words. And then book 2, I think that's probably going to be around 60 something, maybe 70,000. I don't think it'll be over 70,000 though.
Yeah, that's been also, I've been getting like really heavy laden with a lot of books that are like over 300 to 400 pages. So when your pages was kind of like under 300, I was like, sigh of relief.
Oh, yeah. I'm also that kind of writer where, and I think it was just because like I got annoyed at this as a child. I do think you should give yourself room to obviously like flesh out the story. But I read a lot of books as a kid where I was just like, well, this seems pointless. And then I was like, well, maybe it'll come back later, and it never does. It was just pointless information. And I was just like, well, I'm not going to do that unless I have a
reason.
Yeah. Yeah, I give mystery novels a little bit of a pass on that because the point is to give you useless information and try to figure out what is useful. Like, that's fine. That's the point. But like other books, I was just like, this is annoying. I was like, I was like, okay, maybe this will come back. No, never came back. I was like, oh, well. Didn't know why I had to read those 5 pages.
I think there was this one book where they spent 3 pages on describing one room. And it's like a contemporary fantasy novel, and you're just like, why?
Yeah.
So that was torture. So just having a manageable book is kind of nice and refreshing. And then obviously your writing style makes it very fast.
A little bit of a teaser, because there's a big question because I have to give people a reason to read the second book. A big question pops up at the very end of this book, and I knew that when I was in like beta reading stage where you give people like your manuscript and they read it and they tell their thoughts, and I was like, okay, I wonder if the answer to this question, which does get answered later in the series, but I start laying the clues now. I wonder if it's too obvious. And luckily it was not. But if anyone is listening to this right now, when you get to the end of the book, I will say there are, because I think it's fun. I love predicting things. I have no problems if someone like predicts mine, as long as it makes sense and it's still fun and it doesn't like, but because I do that all the time. But yeah, like there's a big question that's asked at the end of the book, but there are clues to what the answers are, like in this book. So I love doing stuff like that. So I think flat out mystery would be a lot of fun because I already love that. But no, I'm the worst. Like every time I see a movie, I try to figure out what the twist is, like in my head as I'm watching it.
Sometimes I can be very quick to pick up clues, but sometimes I don't. And now I'm like, do I need to reread this? We'll see what happens. I'll probably pester you about it once I'm done. I'm like, how dare you? And then I'm going to pester you about giving me the second. It's the worst part about reading the first book. You got to wait for the second.
Yeah, but I will say, at least I'm writing the second now, so hopefully I will try to put the second book out as fast as it is possible with it being edited and the art.
With good quality, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, Tiara, don't rush that book for my sake, you know. All right, so just to wrap up, one more question. I've been interviewing a lot of debut authors on my podcast, and I always ask this question: what advice would you give for first-time authors or people who are wanting to write their book and get it out there, but they're kind of afraid to do so?
I would say that, I guess I wouldn't say just do it, even though like that sounds too simple. It's one of those things. It's not as scary as it seems. Like once you get into it, it demystifies the whole process. And I think the hardest part is sticking with it. So if you really want to write a book, you really should just do it. But if you really want to do it, you have to plan it out, like in the sense of plan time in your day, every day or every other day, or maybe even twice a week. Because like depending on someone's life schedule, writing every day isn't always possible. And plus, you also don't want to burn yourself out. If you do want to write a book, I would say the best thing you probably can do is just have the mindset of just doing it, but then also be smart about it and plan it out and be like, okay, I will set this many hours during the week or during the day or every other day, every couple of days to sit down and do it. Writing also takes time. So the other thing is just being able to stick with it, because I mean, there are some writers that can write books super fast and I love them, and that is awesome. A lot of people aren't that way. So if you aren't that way, I'm not that way. It is okay. And you gotta give yourself grace that sometimes it takes longer to write a book than expected. That, and with the internet, if you have any questions about books, so many people like post their writing experience like online and tips and stuff, which is what I did too. Like just to like, if I had questions about even just like indie publishing, I would look it up online, and that information is so readily available today. I would just say just do it. Once you're in it, it demystifies it, so it's not scary anymore. It's just you just have to stick with it, and I think that's actually just the hardest part, is just sticking with it.
Yeah, I think that can be for anything in life, is the consistency of just continuing on with it, and regardless of results, just pushing through. So yeah. I love that advice. I love hearing it, because I'm like, oh, I can take that for myself. Okay.
It's not as bad, it's not as hard. It's just sticking with it. And I know this is advice for like that people say with everything too. You also can't compare yourself to other people. Like the book you're writing is different. And and everyone's different. Everyone's writing style, speed, how much time they have to devote to it is different. And even if you don't have that much time to devote to it, if you're consistent with the time that you do have, like you'll still be able to do it.
Just so we can let all of our listeners know, just talk about where we can find your book, where we can find you on the social media and all that fun stuff.
Yes. So my book is available everywhere books are sold online, in ebook, paperback, and hardback. So that includes Amazon, Barnes & Noble. I believe Target, like the Target website only has the paperback, but I also have ebooks on Apple Books, Google Play, Walmart.com. Walmart.com. You can also, if you don't want to buy it, you can also request your local library to order it, the ebook or the paperback or hardback, because my book is also in the library systems all across like the US too.
Okay.
So you can definitely, if that's a route that you'd rather take, that is something you can also do. Oh, and thrift books. I forgot about thrift books.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I'll make sure to list all these, maybe not all of them, but at least some key points into the show notes. Definitely her social media links. I
am on Instagram as I'm I think it's Tiara J Brown on Instagram.
And I'll just make sure I put that in the show notes so everyone can go find her. Definitely check out the library too, to check out her book as well. So yeah, that's all with questions. Tiara, thank you so much for sharing everything about your book and your writing. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and I appreciate you hopping on.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. It was a good time.